Thank you, Vinny, for your beautiful introduction. I hope I do justice with all those names. And thanks, Dr. Tharoor, for your beautiful remark. And although it sounds like a political message, and no statement goes without any questions. So we'll have these conversations, throwing questions around. And I try to pinch myself whether it's a dream or reality, because just to have an interaction and discussion with you one-on-one is something that anyone would dream of. So
thank you.
Thanks for coming to Nagaland. And we welcome you to Nagaland, and we are really excited. And at the same time, there are some very non-negotiable questions that you have to answer at the same time, as much as you have propagated your message to the people of Nagaland. Nagas are very, hospitable people, and they are very warm, and they will just give you and serve you any kind of meal wherever you visit. So that's the beauty about the sentiments and the attitude of Nagas. However, ironically, they are also very, very rebellious for the things that they don't like and for the forces and the ideas that suppress them. So I hope and pray that you experience the former rather than the later tonight.
Well, I've already been experiencing the warmth and the hospitality, so you tried the other one.
So I think tonight we have too many things to talk about, and we can't just focus on one topic. So we'll talk anything and every topic that comes under the purview of India, at the same time under the purview of Dr. Shashi Tharoor's knowledge, and we would like to know and understand a lot about his views on many, many issues and many matters that are really concerned to all of us, and as a citizen of Nagaland and at the same time as a citizen of India. I think as a youngster, I'm really, really concerned with the coming of the power, BJP since 2014. Nagas are cornered, like you have just correctly mentioned, far away from Delhi. Even your state even Nagaland is so far away that people hardly know about the Nagas. But what is happening here, the funny thing that is happening here is that the rise of the right-wing extremism has really, really suppressed the Nagas from enjoying their meal, the beef which you mentioned. And even the rise of the left-wing extremism, I would say, the ban of dog meat. All the Nagas may not be eating, but that's a delicacy which many, many Nagas still really enjoy. So there are two forces that are really suppressing the sentiments and the rights and the freedom that Nagas used to enjoy.
So what was the left-wing banning? I missed that. The ban of?
There's a special delicacy regarding to the Naga people, which is dog meat.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. So the two extreme forces are really suppressing the Nagas in a way. So what matters is not about the food or what the Nagas consume. What matters is there are lots and lots of people who are unheard of. So what do you comment on that?
No, I agree. Frankly, I think the whole logic of our democracy and what was enshrined in our constitution is precisely that people should be free to be themselves. If your culture involves you eating items that I may not, that's not my problem. In fact, Gandhiji, when he was asked before independence about how, as somebody who was vegetarian and who was a believer in ahimsa and non-violence to animals, how he could allow the Muslims to go ahead and sacrifice goats on Eid and eat meat and so on. He said very simply, I have my own beliefs and preferences which I apply in my life, but I have no right to impose my way of living on the other person. So the Muslims should be free to eat exactly what they want to eat. And that's my logic when it comes to the Nagas as well. Actually, I have a terrible confession to make in front of a Naga audience. I am vegetarian. But the truth is, I'm very happy to eat amongst people who are eating something else. That's their life. Ultimately, it's an intimate personal decision what you put into your own mouth. Why should a government sitting in Delhi, on the basis of what they imagine to be their moral code, tell you what you can and cannot do? So very simply, I'm totally very much in favor of the idea that we cannot iron out the heterogeneity of our culture and force everyone to be like our idea of the ideal. It has to be instead a system which says, I will be me and you will be you, I will respect you, you respect me, and that's the way in which we're going to live in this society.
And where do we draw that line? Because like eating some stuffs, eating some food and some sort of food types affect or hurt the sentiment of other communities. And it's a big concern. Because when Nagas, or let's say the tribal from northeastern states, go to Delhi, they will cook some stinky foods, which the people of northeastern states love. But there would be hue and cry from the neighborhood. So as a politician, as a leader of this nation, where do we draw the line on what, the freedom of eating what you want to eat, at the same time respecting the sentiments of other people?
No, I think you can respect, my respecting your sentiments means I don't force you to eat something you don't want to eat.
Right.
I can't tell you that if you're going to come to my home, you will only be served something that you don't eat. Just as when I go to a Naga home, I'm given vegetarian food because they don't want to give me meat that I will be unwilling to eat. By the same logic, we should do this. I remember writing an article which you can Google in The Week magazine a few years ago. There was a very interesting incident when the Iranian president was on an official visit to Paris. And at the official lunch, the French served the Iranian delegation their food, and because the Iranians don't drink alcohol, there was a fruit juice or something for them. But the French themselves had, as they usually do, wine with their meal. And the Iranians protested and walked out, saying this was an insult to Iran when wine was served at the table where they were eating. Now that, to my mind, is intolerance on the Iranians' part. No one is forcing them to drink that wine. You see what I'm saying?
I got it.
But how can, just as the French cannot oblige the Iranians to have wine, the Iranians cannot oblige the French not to have wine? That's the kind of principle that I believe. So just as I will not eat your dogs or your cows, I'm not going to tell you not to eat it because that's your culture. You were brought up enjoying that taste. By all means, go ahead and do it.
Right. But we have seen, take your time. We have seen a number of cases, like you have correctly mentioned, where especially the Muslims, number of people were lynched on the road for possessing a piece of meat. And what concerns me as a youngster is, don't we have a constitution that can protect us from this kind of mistreatment based on what we eat and based on what you drink or how you want to behave without hurting anyone? But why can't our constitution protect us from this?
First of all, I must tell you that I'm not a youngster, but I share your concern totally. You're right. And I think it's outrageous that under the Constitution of India, people are doing this kind of thing. The important thing is, you can't prevent people from behaving in an outrageous way, even committing murders and lynchings. But you can stop it by acting responsibly against it. What is shocking is that in many states, the BJP-ruled states have proved reluctant to proceed against these so-called cow vigilantes who are taking the law into their own hands. Yes, some of these states have outlawed the transportation and consumption of beef. Some of the North Indian states and Central Indian states have passed such laws. My state hasn't, your state hasn't, but those states have. And therefore, technically, if somebody really has beef, they are in violation of the law. But the whole point about the rule of law is that if there is a law and somebody is breaking it, you can proceed against them according to the law. You can arrest them, you can prosecute them, you can charge them, whatever it may be. You cannot take the law into your own hands and murder somebody on the streets. That is simply illegal by any definition, and allowing that to happen is actually not, as the Home Minister shockingly said, teaching them a lesson. It is in fact betraying the fundamental lessons of our Constitution, which is that our system exists to have laws that apply equally to all. So if you don't like something somebody is doing, you can actually collect the evidence and report them to the police if it's against the law. You have no right to stop them, beat them up on the road, filming the beating up and watch the person die in front of you, all of which have happened in these lynching incidents in recent years. So all I can say is that we need to raise our voices, and we need to frankly also use our ballots to change, to remove people from power who are not willing to uphold these principles of the Constitution.
Thank you for that. I think it really creates doubts in our mind on the system, because what we are supposed to do as per the social contract theory, the government is supposed to protect us and we are supposed to obey the Constitution. And when we have that mutual responsibility towards each other, there is order in the society. But regardless of the existence of this both, we can see that many citizens are not protected enough, that their safety and safeguard is not guaranteed. So that's something that is concerning to us.
Right. But at the same time, I would agree that we shouldn't exaggerate how bad this is. I think that thanks to a vigilant media and NGOs and liberals, we know about pretty much all the major cases of lynching that have happened. And in a country of 1.4 billion people, if we know about a dozen such incidents in the last 8 years, that's bad, but it's not the end of the world. It means that other cases have not occurred. But by publicizing this, we have only gone half the distance. We now need to prosecute and punish those who've done this. But when you find in Gujarat that, forget a beef lynching, a woman who was raped, her child was murdered, and all these horrible things happened, the perpetrators are given, who are sentenced to life, are given bail in just less than 11 years of imprisonment, and are happily home and being celebrated by their friends in the ruling party. There's something deeply wrong with that. And I think that we have to find ways of ensuring that some of these things are never allowed to happen again, because they remain a major blot on our conscience. I'm referring to the Bilkis Banu case in the case of Gujarat.
Right.
But there are all these other cases, these cases of Pelu Khan, who was beaten to death practically for transporting cows. And what is more, he was not doing them for beef. He was a dairy farmer with a license to transport cows. But he had the misfortune of being a Muslim in the wrong place at the wrong time with cows in his truck, and he got beaten to death. Or that young man who went home to get married and was tied to a tree and beaten to his death until he said Jai Shri Ram, and even then he, poor fellow, died. I mean, these kinds of things are criminal acts. There is no excuse or justification. Everyone involved has to be given exemplary punishment by our judicial system, or the respect for the rule of law will disappear.
Now, coming back to your party is such a grand old party of India, the Indian National Congress, and your party has ruled the country for, let's say, more than half a century. But since 2014 and until 2023, the party's performance has really gone down the drain. And what do you think, what do you attribute this failure or in the sinking of your party to? Because having ruled the country for such a long time, what has changed the party that your party is not able to rise up again, the Modi factor this time?
Well, I wouldn't write it off just yet, but I would say that certainly a party that got used to being in power for a long time may have found it more difficult to cope with loss of power than a party which, say, has been elected once, loses election, and comes back still with the fire in the belly to win the next election. So it's possible. It's possible that there was, to some degree, a certain fatigue that had set in, and that's true. But on the other hand, the party, by its long experience in power, is able to offer the nation people with genuine experience in how to deliver results. If you look at all the transformations that have happened in India since the British left us in 1947, with a population that lived, 90% of the Indian population lived below the poverty line in 1947. And we had life expectancy in India of just 27. We had literacy rates of about 16%. Women in India had 8% literacy when the British left. So from there to where we have come, obviously the Congress Party takes a fair amount of credit for all the progress that was made over a long period of time. And then we can also look at the last 10 years of UPA rule, where you had the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme named for Mahatma Gandhi, Manrega. You had the Right to Information Act, which has given every Indian citizen the right to find out what's being done with taxpayers' money. You've got a number of other similar things, the Food Security Act, the Right to Education Act, and so on. You've created a framework of rights which every Indian citizen enjoys. All of this was done by succession of Congress governments, and therefore you have people who have the experience in delivering this kind of result available on tap, as it were. The second thing you've got, I think, with the Congress party is you've got a very long history that goes back well before the freedom movement. And therefore the ethos that we celebrate in the Constitution was deeply embedded in Congress values all along. So the values of the Constitution are the values of the Congress, and you can be reasonably sure. I shouldn't say 100% sure, because I know that there have been failings on our part in the past as well. But the truth is that they've been nothing like the kind of failings that we're seeing in the present government. We also have a tremendous respect for institutions. I'll give you one simple example. When Congress governments used to name chiefs of the Election Commission, they would go out of their way to pick retired bureaucrats who had a reputation for being tough and independent, because that's what the job required, was a tough, independent-minded person who could stand up to all the parties. So Congress named someone like T.N. Seshan, someone like J.M. Lingdo, people who really had the capacity to take a no-nonsense stand when it came to election malpractices and so on. Now, what we're seeing, unfortunately, with the present government is the opposite. That instead of strengthening the autonomous institutions of our democracy, what they are doing in many ways is hollowing out those institutions, not only by appointing people who are, by and large, in all these institutions, people who have got a track record of supporting whatever the BJP government wanted them to do, but on top of that, by diluting their true independence and autonomy and authority, so that everything from right to information to the Reserve Bank to the Election Commission to pretty much every autonomous institution in our country is that much less autonomous. And we're seeing the extreme examples of this with the blatant misuse of the ED, the CBI, the IT, the Revenue Intelligence, all of these things to prosecute or harass the political opponents of the government. That's not what our democracy was meant to be all about. And that's why I would say at least you got in the Congress. Maybe they ruled for almost 60 years, but in those 60 years you didn't see so much of flagrant misuse and abuse of our institutions. In fact, you saw some willingness to strengthen those institutions, which is what we need to have a strong democracy.
I think I would partially agree with all the credits or that have been claimed, with the rule of Congress for the last more than 50 years and so on. But what really makes me think is, I think regardless of how much, let's safely say that, or let's assume that Congress has done the best ever for the country. But my question is, are the voters able to understand the importance of this? Whether BJP has done or not, but people are still voting for BJP. What is wrong with Congress? Either it's because of the weak leadership in the party, because Nehru has been the leader, or was the leader after Indira Gandhi became the leader. There were tall leaders that had really ruled the country, under their leadership. But under the current leadership, is everything fine with Congress? That's my question, and we really want to hear from you then.
Yeah, sure, I understand your desire to hear from me on this one, because the truth is that many people have concerns. They want a strong alternative. I want to just correct you briefly on one thing, which is not that the people are voting for the BJP. The last two elections were won by the BJP in 2014 with 31% of the vote, and in 2019 with 37% of the vote. So the majority of the people are still people who have not voted for the BJP. Let's get that very clear.
Makes sense.
That's important to understand, because, we have a first past the post system in the parliamentary system. And all you need really in many constituencies, there are 3, 4 candidates, 5 candidates, 35, 40% you'll win the seat. And a lot of this support that the BJP has got is concentrated very heavily in the Hindi-speaking states and across northern India by and large. Now, of course, they're trying to expand. They've come to the northeast. They've certainly picked up some ground here, mainly by sort of wholesale purchase of some legislators or other parties, but now they've entrenched themselves in the northeast in the way they hadn't. I remember in 2014, I would say to people that even after this election defeat, Congress is still the only party with a national footprint, because the BJP has no footprint in the northeast and has no footprint in the southeast or southwest. But that I can no longer say, because they do actually have a footprint in the northeast, and they are very slowly making an impact in the south, but I would say very slowly. I'm still very confident that the BJP is not going to be able to do much in Kerala or Tamil Nadu, and not a heck of a lot more than that in other neighboring states. But coming back to the Congress, I know what you're pushing me on. The Congress, I think, has gone through a lot of difficult times in the course of these last few years, and one of the problems was indeed this sort of perception, which was not totally unjustified, that the party was drifting and rudderless and not clear where it was going. I would argue that has now ended with the Bharat Jodo Yatra, in which Rahul Gandhi not only has transformed his own image in a very, very impressive way, but has also been able to demonstrate the organizational capacity of the Congress Party to organize a 3,000-kilometer march from the tip of India and Kanyakumari to the snowy hills of Kashmir, and to do so without a single glitch, very smoothly, safely and efficiently. That itself is a tribute to the Congress Party's national strength and image and efficiency. And as a result of all of this, it has helped revive the spirit of the Congress worker. And the Congress workers I've seen after the yatra are really feeling a lot of self-belief and a lot of optimism about their ability to go to the voters and convey their message. I agree that it still has to be proven. And we have 1 year to get our act together and show that in 2024 we can deliver a much better result than in 19 and 14.
I totally got your point. However, I still feel, and I still have a big doubt that there is the Bharat Jodo Yatra will ever convert anyone from that mission to a vote. Because as a political party, what matters to you is the vote. So still, it's an unproven movement, unproven mission. Only if the voter turns out and turn their votes to Congress for BJP, then it will prove that, okay, Rahul Gandhi is taking the lead in a way that he should be. But so far, this Bharat Jodo Yatra is, let's say it's a hype, until it's proven.
Actually, all the hype I've seen in Indian politics comes from the other side. We're not very good at hype. we just give you the plain unvarnished truth. But look, I mean, what did the BJP try and caricature Rahul Gandhi as being? They said, oh, he's a shoot and scoot politician, he'll come and declare an agitation today and fly off on a holiday tomorrow, that he's not serious, he's not accessible, all these people can't get appointments to see him, that he is not a serious politician, he hasn't been giving good interviews, the media, all of these kinds of caricatures came around, right? And what did you see in the course of this yatra? Number one, you can't call him shoot and scoot when he's marched 135 days and he stuck to his guns and stuck to it. There were no real holidays in between. There was just this complete solid commitment. You can't call him inaccessible when you see him every day on social media holding hands with people, putting his arms around them, talking to them, all sorts of people. Every day, a dozen people of different backgrounds, religions, activities, interests come and talk to him. He listens to them. He talks to them. He listens to their point of view. And then you can't call him unserious when he gives a dozen press conferences during the yatra in which he addresses very serious issues, from unemployment to inflation to farmers' welfare to weavers to fisher folk, all of these things. And how many press conferences Prime Minister Modi given in these last 9 years?
Zero.
So there's my answer.
But I still think that in the back of your mind, you can be thinking that you could have been the party, leader actually, which you had contested for. And I think it was such a disappointment, honestly, not because you were not elected, but just because someone who is unknown to the world, Mr. Kharge, was elected in your place, and he was totally unknown to the world. Honestly, I did not know him before, so I was expecting that Dr. Shashi Tharoor would be elected as the president of Congress, and I was hoping that he would turn the table around once for the Congress party. It's not that we are, giving our allegiance to the Congress, but as a political observer, it really makes us think that way. However, that did not happen. You, out of more than 9,000 votes, you just scored what? You just secured more than 1,000 votes. So was Congress democratic in that sense?
Listen, democracy, you add up the numbers and whoever gets more wins. So that's the result, right? Look, I think there was a useful exercise in the party, because I think my candidacy served in many ways like the steam valve on top of a pressure cooker. I don't know if you step into the kitchen much, but when you're cooking and the pressure is building up in the pressure cooker, that valve on the top through which the steam comes out,
yes,
that actually saves it. If you didn't have that valve, the whole thing could explode. That's literally what would happen. You have a very messy kitchen afterwards.
Okay.
So I think having had this presidential election, having given people a chance to vent their feelings, sometimes their frustrations, their criticisms, did the party a lot of good. First of all, pressure cooker didn't explode. Secondly, we don't have a messy kitchen. We are now looking at a party which has given people a chance, and I hope that in the next few months, it's still early days, the election was over in the middle of October, And thereafter we've had the winter session of Parliament, the budget session of Parliament, everyone's in busy. Now we have our Congress plenary coming up at the end of this week. And I can tell you that there is no question in my mind that the party has a golden opportunity now to build on all this, on the ferment that took place during the election, the extraordinary exhilaration of the Bharat Jodo Yatra and the sense of triumphant success that many in the party feel about the Yatra. I think it's a great time for the party to now reorient itself with new energy in a new direction to capture the voters' imagination in 2024. Right. But it's not in my hands. I lost, I'm out, I have to watch very carefully, and I hope, like you, that we will have a lot to look forward to when the party leadership decides to go forward. But those who have won the election, it's their business, and it's not my place to sit here saying what they should do.
I think now the most important election, the general election in 2024, it will be coming up. And BJP is going to project a manifesto in the sense of the Uniform Civil Code, right? Because they have done in the past with the construction of Ram Temple, in the application of Article 371 for Jammu and Kashmir. And they have succeeded in doing that. And arguably that what keeps them in government. Now they are likely to be targeting your Uniform Civil Code in order to woo the Hindu majority voters. What is your response? What will be your response to tackle such manifesto?
We worry about it, first of all, and certainly here in Nagaland, I'm sure many of you are worried about it, because obviously you don't want anything that encroaches upon your own special culture. And 371A guarantees that, so there's also that issue of how that's going to be dealt with. Part of the issue is that no one knows exactly what the Uniform Civil Code would consist of. My own guesswork is that they are not entirely sure themselves. There has been some talk in Uttarakhand that they're going to try and float a Uniform Civil Code. Uttarakhand has got very few minorities, and I don't think that it's more than gesture politics. But still it will be interesting to see what exactly the components of a Uniform Civil Code will be, what will be in, what will be out.
Right.
Remember that the personal laws of many communities only deal with marriage, inheritance and divorce. And of course, with tribal customs and culture, which is protected under the special section as well. So what are they planning to abolish? We don't know yet.
Yes.
See, the interesting thing about this whole business is we're discussing an issue in the abstract. In the abstract, I can also say, yes, a Uniform Civil Code is a desirable idea. But as Jawaharlal Nehru said, it's a desirable idea, but you have to take everyone along with it before you get it. You can't impose it on those who are unwilling. And that's the Congress Party's view. We're not against a Uniform Civil Code in principle. Most countries have a Uniform Civil Code. But how does it work in practice depends on the fine point of the details which no one has seen. So I think what we have to look at very carefully is what they unleash on us. I warned before the 2019 election in what became a very notorious statement, though I hadn't intended it to be, it was an obvious statement. I said, if you vote for the BJP, you will get a Hindu Pakistan. By which I meant a Hindu version or a Hindutva version of what Pakistan has become, which is an intolerant state in which the Islamic majority essentially makes life impossible for everybody else. Now what you're seeing immediately after the 2019 victory was the criminalization of triple talaq, which is a civil offense already declared illegal by the Supreme Court, but they passed a law to rub it in the noses of Muslims. And I said in Parliament, this is not a law for the protection of Muslim women, it's a law for the punishment of Muslim men. If the crime is that you are abandoning your wife without taking responsibility for her welfare, are Muslims the only ones who have done this? But they're the only ones who attract criminal punishment for abandoning their wives without taking responsibility. Any other faith, it's only a civil offense. Second, they came up with UAPA. UAPA was a law that already existed, but they amended it to ensure that they could charge anyone as a suspected terrorist.
Yes.
They could then lock him up for indefinite periods of time without charge and without bail. And guess so far who all they've arrested under that? Only Muslims. Another shocking development. The Special Marriages Act and get a civil registration, in which case her rights as somebody married comes from the civil law. And as long as you have that right to opt out, which you do in India today, I don't see what the problem is. If anyone in our country can choose to have their life, let's say a Naga in Nagaland is subject to 371A and the practices here. But if you're in Delhi tomorrow and you want to marry a non-Naga, your marriage will almost certainly take place under other provisions of law, and you will be governed by whatever provisions of law you get married under in Delhi. So that's essentially the kind of options that Indians have, which I want to see preserved. Beyond that, I think this could well turn out to be a complete red herring. But we'll see. Will they take the risk of unleashing this on us before the election in order to polarize the electorate? Or will they hold on to it until after the election so that they don't lose votes once people realize what exactly they're proposing? You know, all of this we have to wait and see. But it's not in our hands, it's in theirs.
Given the nature of Indian diversity in India and the degree of the diversity, you and I and them, I think a uniform civil code is still, I don't see any possibility as I imagine. Because like you say, Nehru himself has stated it's just a desirability of, as a nation it would be nice to have such things, but it's not possible in the case of India. So leaving that aside now, let's look back to the state of Nagaland. Like, what is the stake, or what is that's something that Nagaland is going to get out of this election? Because imagining that BJP and her own alliance will come to power. So what will be the strategy, and what is one thing that Congress is going to focus upon? Otherwise, see, it's been, I think since 2003, Congress has not been in power. It's for almost 3 decades. I'm sure it's 2 decades. And it's such a big shame as a party.
Now, when you say what should you look forward to in this election, I hope you look forward to a new government, and a different government with different parties in it. And Congress should be one of those parties. I would say that if you look objectively, the things that I talked about are pretty much the things we stand for. We want a real focus on development, which frankly has not been delivered. We want an absolute emphasis on education. We want at the same time to stand for the diversity of India and the rights of the Naga people to preserve their culture and their traditions. We want very much to go out to all of you and say, what you want to see in your lives is what we want for you. And I was in Kohima with a young candidate, barely 33 years old, who's our candidate for Kohima town. And this is somebody who's been an NGO activist and so on before, and who has ideas about lots of things that come from his own experience. Now, these are the kinds of messages we're giving to the Naga voter, to the voters of Nagaland. But ultimately, it's up to all of you. My own feeling is that the failures of the government that I have already mentioned in my remarks earlier at the podium should in itself disqualify this government from winning people's votes again. How many promises can you make and fail to fulfill and still go and demand the votes of people?
Thank you for sharing that. I think one question that Dr. Shashi Tharoor has to answer to the Nagas is the funny and outlandish Naga headgear comment that he made.
Yeah, okay.
That could be out of the context. However, how do you...
Very proud to wear that one. No, I'll tell you what it was. It was a political point because Mr. Modi had, at that point, up to that point,
right,
he had worn every conceivable kind of headgear wherever he'd gone in the country. And he had just been to Nagaland in the previous month and worn quite something extraordinary with a couple of dead birds stuck in the head, and also it was an amazing headgear. So I used the word outlandish without intending as an insult. I said he's willing to wear all that, but he never wears a Muslim skull cap, ever. Up to that point anyway. I gather he has since done so once in some Arab country. But otherwise, there are actually videos that his party circulated of some Muslims receiving him somewhere and giving him a cap to wear and him turning them away, saying, I don't want it. So I said, what is the message of bias that our Prime Minister is sending against one community in our country? That was the point I was making. It was a serious point about not discriminating against one. So I said, here is the Prime Minister, and I think we had 16 photographs in that tweet of him wearing all sorts of caps and turbans and everything else, and this, I said, the Prime Minister has worn everything from caps and turbans to the most outlandish headgear, but he refuses to wear a Muslim skull cap. It was a political point I was making. In the process, I upset those who realized that the outlandish headgear I was referring to was a Naga cap. So let me take this opportunity to apologize to all of you. The point is still accurate, but I mean no disrespect, and I'm going to wear that cap with great pride. Thank you for giving it to me.
I think our leaders in the politics should learn how to apologize, because it's a very, very rare character. It's a very, very rare to see things in the form of apology from a
Well, I've become notorious for demanding that the British apologize. So let me set the example.
Thanks for bringing that topic in. I think, see, now let's try to understand this. You demand an apology from the British for all its activities that they have done, they have trained, whatever. I think you will be the right person to describe what British has done to India. But if you look at the Nagas, let's say before you join politics, or before the Naga ceasefire in 1997, the Indian army had raped thousands and hundreds of Naga women. The Indian armies have razed thousands of Naga homes and killed thousands and thousands. Would ever India apologize? India not as a separate entity. However, would the government of India ever apologize to the Nagas for all this treatment?
Well, I hope that some of those figures are exaggerated. I hope, because I don't know. All I can say, if they're not, even if only 1% of what he said is true, I would apologize on behalf of the Indian people. I don't think any of us wants our army to misbehave. We know that they have come out to maintain a law and order situation where there was an insurgency going on. That does not justify demolition of homes, it does not justify rape of women, it does not justify anything other than the protection of the people, which is why the army is here. So I would say, without any hesitation, that if any atrocity, any human rights violation, any wrongdoing has been committed, if I were in government today, but even if I'm not in government, I say to you as a private citizen of India, I apologize. I think it's wrong. And we should really show our apology and contrition. First of all, let's get a solution, get it done, and let's then convey in every significant way possible that we want to make up for what's been done wrong.
I think it's very sweet to hear from you, vouching and rooting for Naga solutions. However, the fact tells us, and the past recent history tells us that it was Congress government who started this peace negotiation since 1997, and until 2014, there was no any concrete outcome. So how do we trust the Congress government that they would deliver the Nagas some viable solution?
I think in all fairness, it takes two hands to clap. And you know perfectly well the level of intransigence that the Congress party encountered from some of the older, well-established insurgency leaders when they started these talks. It took a while. And even then, as you know, one faction agreed and the other faction did not, and so on. There were some real issues. I would say that when the Prime Minister announced in 2015, as it turned out prematurely or unjustifiably, that there was a Naga Accord, we were amongst those who applauded, because we all want peace in Nagaland. We don't want to see this going down the tubes. But despite the fact that so much of groundwork was done, the government was not able to deliver a lasting solution. That shows you how intractable some of these negotiations were. My own view is this should be given urgent priority. If some of the people who've been negotiating on behalf of the government are not the right people, then find new people, but get back to the negotiating table and find a solution. Because I think, as I said, the Naga people deserve normalcy. You all deserve to lead a better life, and a life without this overhanging shadow over your heads, so we can focus on what every Indian wants, which is a better life for themselves and for their children.
And one question, should Nagas be afraid or concerned about the possibility of abrogation of Article 371A in the future, like as it was done actually for Jammu and Kashmir?
Look, I do worry. When 370 happened, I spoke for the Congress party in the Lok Sabha, And one of the things I pointed out is the very dangerous precedent it sets. Because the Constitution requires that you cannot abrogate these provisions without the consent of the state concerned. It was always assumed in a democracy that that consent is given by the elected representatives of the people. But what did the BJP government do in Kashmir? They declared president's rule, dismissed the government and dissolved the assembly. And then they turned to the governor, whom they themselves had appointed, and said, do you agree? What do you think he's going to say? They're his bosses, they've appointed him. He said, yes, of course, I agree. And then they said, see, the representative of Kashmir has agreed, the governor speaks for the assembly because there is no assembly. Now that's a terrible precedent. You can do that to any state in India. You can use one excuse or the other, dissolve the assembly, then you can actually declare president's rule, which de facto means governor's rule, and then you ask the same governor whom you've appointed, what should we do? The governor says, whatever you like, sir. Yes, sir, 3 bags full. And you go ahead and take the steps you want. It's a very, very worrying precedent. Now, of course, the BJP assured us in the parliament debate that they don't see this as a precedent. It's a special case, one time, this, that. They even promised that Jammu and Kashmir statehood would be restored before too long. All of that, nothing has happened since then to restore it. But the worry we have is that if you look at their ideology, which is this, one nation, one language, one religion, one leader, one culture, one everything, then you're looking at a situation where, unfortunately, all these special provisions could, in theory, be vulnerable. Now, they have not said they're going to abolish it. We have said we worry that they could, out of consistency with their ideology, they might do it. But let me turn around and say that if they tried, we would be part of the objection, the resistance, strengthen our voice both in the state assembly and in the national parliament, and we will speak for the rights of those people of Nagaland to have their special provisions protected.
I mean, personally, thank you for such a statement. Now, related to that, can I relate, why is it so easy to amend or just to abrogate easily by a government? Like you have described some time ago, not today, but in the past, that you prefer a presidential form of government, which makes the government function like an autocratic dictatorial in that nature. So, do you think our parliamentary system is losing its value, or it's like...
Yeah, I think at the moment what we're seeing is the worst of both worlds. We have a parliamentary system being run presidentially. So you have a very strong one-man rule, and at the same time, Parliament has no independent capacity to hold the government accountable because they just serve as a rubber stamp. You see, the perversity of the parliamentary system is that instead of the classic separation of powers, legislature, executive and judiciary, you have a situation where you're electing the legislature in order to form the executive. Right? So you elect MPs because you want to see, you elect a BJP MP because you want to see Mr. Modi as Prime Minister. Yeah. Which is a very peculiar logic. Right. Because once Mr. Modi is then elected by the majority in Parliament, that becomes a captive majority for him. No BJP MP has the freedom to disagree with his Prime Minister. Whatever law comes from the cabinet is passed automatically by the BJP. All our parliamentary debates and discussions and arguments are de facto wasted because the government does what it wants and it has a majority to do it. The reason I advocated a presidential system is the presidential system separates the three completely. The president doesn't depend upon a majority in the legislature, but equally the legislature does not depend on the president. So you actually have legislators who are able to hold the president accountable for whatever decisions he makes. He may have to form different coalitions with different parties on different bills, on different laws that he wants to pass. So that could be, a very different change. And finally, if you're talking about a potential dictatorship, the counterbalance would be that just as you have a directly elected president in Delhi, you'll have a directly elected governor in every state who may not be from the president's party or follow his line. Right. And they too would have an independent power and authority to resist the president. But let's stress, this is a purely theoretical conversation.
Right.
I have sworn to uphold the Constitution of India, which upholds a parliamentary democracy. That's what I'm committed to. As if you like, a thinker or an academic scholar kind of thing, I'm willing to argue the merits. But in practice, let me say, there is no doubt that the majority of political opinion in India favors the continuation of the present system. And we'll just have to try and make the present system work as best as we can for our people, rather than fantasize about another system.
If there was ever a presidential form of government in India, I think, and I have a feeling that you could have been the Prime Minister of this, or the President of this country. Because
You're far too kind. Thank you.
in such a system, like you say, anyone from the party can contest as the President of the country, like we see in the US. So is that part of your preference? Is that part of your preference to have the presidential form of government too?
That train is already leaving the station. You can see my grey hairs. But I mean, Barack Obama would be impossible in India.
Right.
Because here's somebody who is a councillor in a city corporation, runs for the Senate without being the favoured candidate of his party,
Yes.
gets his party nomination in primary election, then wins the
We have seen
state election. Then he goes to Washington, and in his first term as a senator, within 3-4 years, he runs for president and he wins, again defeating his party's favoured candidate in the primaries, and then becomes president. Now that kind of system is only possible where an individual of charisma, ability, all of those things, can appeal to voters above the party machinery. In a parliamentary system, everything depends on the party machinery. Tomorrow the party can choose not to give me a ticket, for example.
Yeah.
Even if I did get a ticket, I would have to have the party wanting to put me forward as their leader. But in our system, we already have leaders in our party. There is no vacancy there. So when you think about it, the American system, the presidential system, is very different from our system. And as I say, it's an idle exercise. We can discuss it in theory.
Yeah.
But for me, I have to work within the system we're in. And in the system we're in, my job is to be Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, which I've been for 3 terms.
Yeah.
I'm chairing a parliamentary committee, which I've enjoyed doing, because as an opposition MP, we still have a system where some committees are chaired by opposition MPs. And one can try and hold the government accountable in those ways. Plus, through my writing, my public speeches, this kind of interaction with you, I'm able to air some ideas which I hope will in some way influence people listening to me.
I think that exactly could be one reason why Congress is like in trouble at this time, because they give priority to seniority or to the Gandhi family, let's say. But if you look at BJP, if LK Advani, you know, when you look at the seniority, he could have been, or he should have been, the Prime Minister for now. But BJP made the right decision by choosing what the people want and who the people want, and that person seemed to be Modi, and that came to be very, very true, and that's why BJP has been for the 2 consecutive terms and ready for another 3 terms. Do you agree with that?
Look, it's a point of view. I don't want to sit here disparaging. You know, I managed to have a political career for almost 14 and a half years without saying anything negative about any individuals as individuals. I disagree with their policies, what they advocate, what they stand for. But I believe that you cannot, in a democracy, disparage individuals as human beings. They are who they are. You accept who they are, but you disagree with what they stand for. That's my attitude to all of this. So when you say BJP did the right thing, I got a bit of a shock. Is it the right thing given the results the nation has faced? But I understand what you're saying, and I would not disparage any individual. But I would say that each party does have its own culture. And Congress is by no means unique in that respect. You know, Shiv Sena had the Thakres. The DMK, Mr. Karunanidhi's son is now the chief minister. His own son has become a minister.
Yes.
In pretty much every state. In Mulayam Singh Yadav's Samajwadi Party, Akhilesh became his successor. In Lalu Yadav's RJD, Tejasvi became his successor. So right across the political firmament, this seems to be there. And frankly, we also have a cultural issue here. I mean, I know so many, eye doctors whose children are eye doctors, dentists whose children are dentists. It's all, and cricketers whose children are trying to be cricketers. I mean, even where only merit and ability are an issue, the fact is that our culture somehow encourages the transmission of certain tendencies and responsibilities down the family tree. So it's difficult to blame Congress uniquely for dynasty because the rest of the country shows so many examples of family inheritance being the principle.
But I would refute to that by saying that just because other parties are doing, it's not that Congress should be doing as well. It's time to rise up from there and move on to lead the youngsters.
Well, in all fairness, Rahul Gandhi stepped down in 2019, refused all entreaties to come back, and an election was held for the party presidency. And the person who won is unconnected in terms of any blood ties to anyone who's been president before. So, I mean, I think in all fairness, you can say the Congress has taken a much more decisive step in that direction than any of the other parties that I mentioned to you as an example.
That's politically correct, Dr. Tharoor.
Well, one has to be politically correct sometimes. What do you expect me to sit here and say?
Thanks for your honesty anyway. Implicitly, Tharoor.
You want to call your show politically incorrect, is it?
I think we have taken a lot of time, and before we just jump into the Q&A hour from the audience, I think we will conclude our conversation with few personal questions. And the first is, how many foreign languages can you speak?
Well, my French is reasonably good, though increasingly after I returned to India, the only person I can speak it with is the French ambassador. And I don't see him that often, but when I do, yeah, I do. And once in a while I run into somebody who claims to speak French, and usually I discover within 2 minutes that many of my compatriots don't speak as much French or French as well as they think they do. But in terms of foreign languages, I have to draw a line there. I just haven't had the time. I do, God willing, I have a gift for learning language. I just haven't had the time. I can speak, I can understand little bits of Spanish and Italian and so on, but I must say that it takes a serious effort of commitment to learn a language. And then you ideally need to live in an environment where that language is spoken to get used to the sound of it and the natural thing of it. And because I was posted in Geneva, in Switzerland, which is French-speaking Switzerland, I had 2 stints totaling 8 years where I was living in a place where you needed French for daily life, and so that helped my French become reasonably good. Otherwise, it's Hindi, Malayalam, smatterings of Bengali and Tamil, but really only smatterings. And I tried to keep this up, a lot of Bangladeshi waiters and taxi drivers in New York, so I talked to them in Bangla when I could, but it's difficult to maintain a language without actually being soaked in that atmosphere.
And what is one tip that you would give to the people here to learn and communicate better in English?
Well, I've often said this to young people in particular, for God's sake, read. Because you don't acquire a vocabulary by mugging up words in a dictionary. You acquire a vocabulary by seeing how words are used. So the more widely you read, the more books you read, the more articles you read, whatever you read, you will see words you didn't know earlier being used in different contexts, and you will understand their meaning just from reading. You will understand not only their meaning but their nuance, what's the right way to use them, what's the wrong way to use them, and so on. I can say with pride that after a while I stopped looking up words. I just read them often enough to understand exactly what they meant. And it's not difficult provided you read widely. If you don't read at all, and I'm very alarmed to see some youngsters today who associate books only with schoolwork and homework, and who don't seem to think of books as a source of pleasure. I was an asthmatic child in India where there was no television, where there was no Nintendo or PlayStation, where there was no computers or mobile phones. In fact, there were no other distractions available if you weren't well enough to go and play with your friends. And whenever I was down with asthma, all I had were books, and books were my education, books were my escape, books were my entertainment. And that therefore became an unending source of pleasure, and I hope you can try and impart some of that value to others, because by reading you will certainly improve your vocabulary in English or any other language you want to read it, and you will certainly be able to make much more of an impact that way.
Thank you. And what is one that English word, the latest that you know, you want us to know?
Read is my favorite English word. Read.
Okay, and I think I read about you a little bit on how you function with your, co-workers and parliamentarians, and someone commented that he has never seen Dr. Shashi Tharoor getting angry. Is that real? Is that true?
Yeah, because honestly, anger doesn't resolve anything. It always makes the situation worse.
Right.
And it usually does you harm. When you get angry, your blood pressure goes up, the toxins released in your system, you're getting literally, heated up. And to what end? It doesn't help you solve a problem. So I've learned from seeing some very serious people, someone like a Kofi Annan, who was my boss as Secretary General of the United Nations, who almost was like an Indian yogi. He was so anchored in himself that neither pleasure nor pleasure would actually change his demeanor. I'm sure that some of it is internalized. But if you can stay calm, you can always respond better to a situation. And remember the other thing, you can't control the way other people behave. All you can control is the way you react to how other people behave. So your reaction is what you have control over. Why do you want to surrender that control? Don't get angry.
That's amazing. And last second question, how does your normal day look like as an MP or as a parliamentarian?
Completely unpredictable. Because when I'm in Parliament, of course, there's Parliament, but there's also, I come back after Parliament and there's a whole series of appointments, events, everything. And because I have this double life as a politician as well as a writer, I'm often involved in literary events, book releases, that sort of stuff, which I get called to a lot. And then I have, again, the worst of both worlds, because as a politician, it's very difficult to say no. And so I get dragged into a lot more book events than I would have said yes to if I was just a writer. Then I would only go to the ones I was really interested in. But as a politician, I have to go because I can't afford to make political enemies by saying no. So the life is very busy. Then, of course, there's a lot of travel. I get invited everywhere. And when there are opportunities for political campaigns like this, that also takes me completely out of my regular schedule. So there's no predictable pattern, Lung Leng. But I will say that the unpredictability can also make life interesting. Because you're never really bored by doing the predictable all the time.
Yeah.
Since every time something new comes up, you can learn, see something new, experience something new. I'm embarrassed to admit this is my first visit to Nagaland. But now, thanks to this, I have a new experience and a new sense of the warmth and friendliness and hospitality of the Naga people. It's great.
Right. If you had come more often, probably your body could be in power as well.
Sorry?
Not necessarily you. If you and your leadership, your party leadership, had come more often to Nagaland, like the BJP did, I think as an observer, BJP leadership would often visit Nagaland, the northeastern states, more and more often than the Congress themselves.
Sure, I think it's a very good point. I mean, I think the party should make sure that it gives the state the attention it deserves.
Right. So. And finally, I'm really curious to know about the All India
Professionals
Congress. If you can just brief us a little bit of what is.
It's an organization I'm proud to have suggested to the party leadership way back in 2009, as it happens. But at that time, there was not much traction for the idea. But in 2017, Rahul Gandhi, who had just become vice president of the party, but was playing a hands-on role in many things, he worked to create 2 or 3 new entities in the party, and one of them was the All India Professionals Congress, which he asked me to lead. And the idea was that, our professionals, no one reaches out to them. In fact, the custom in our country appears to be that professionals will do their jobs, work hard, pay their taxes, and then come home and complain about the politicians. That's been the usual practice. I've seen it myself with my own father as a professional and his friends. And I said, why should that be? Why do professionals, middle class, urban, educated people, and not only urban, also in rural areas, why should they feel so alienated from the political world that they don't even know, how to get their message and their ideas across to politicians? And they don't feel that the politicians are there to listen to them. Let's create a platform where both things can happen. And Rahul Gandhi liked that idea, and we created the AIPC. I'm proud to say we now have about 10,000 members in 22 states. Oddly enough, in some states it never caught on, so only 22, but we've got those. Nagaland is one of the 22. We have a good chapter here. In fact, our Vice President Lovito is around. Where are you, Lovito? Stand up and wave your hands over here. There we are. So if you're interested, if you're a professional, Lovito Zimomi is our Vice President for the Nagaland chapter, and what he's trying to do is to encourage more professionals to come and sign up. And it's an opportunity, first of all, for you to air your ideas within the chapter, and then not only have your ideas heard by the national leadership, but interact with leaders when they come. Of course, now I'm here for an election campaign, so though I've been spending partly some time with Lovito, I've not been able to have any separate AIPC event. But if I were to come to Nagaland when there's no election going on, I would probably come for AIPC, because they would be the ones who would normally play host as long as I'm still chairman of it. And I would have an opportunity to interact with other professionals. I do that in every other state. I've just come, in fact, from Maharashtra, not only bogged down in a very long and protracted war, but much more dependent on China than we would like them to be, because China, unfortunately, is hostile to India. And if Russia, you want to rely on Russia to be your friend, your major military supplier, and all of that, and your diplomatic supporter in international forums, and now you have that country which you wanted to rely on so much becoming that much closer to China, then where do you stand? So that strengthens my argument that we should not have been so completely obliging to Russia. But on the other side of the equation, there are some arguments for the Indian line. Number one, the Russians have not been as badly affected by sanctions as the Western countries expected. They have comfortably survived the sanctions. And I've actually met Indian students from Moscow and so on over the Christmas vacations who told me their lives are completely the same, nothing has been affected by the sanctions. So that hasn't hurt the Russians. Secondly, we ourselves have gained, in a quote-unquote sense, by being able to import oil and gas from Russia at cheaper prices than the current prevailing market price. And ironically, we are refining that oil in India and selling it to America and the US in many cases. So India has not done badly economically out of it. We had some challenges, particularly as commodity prices went up when they interrupted the Ukrainian wheat. That was a problem for the whole world. But did you know, for example, that 75% of the sunflower oil and sunflower seeds in India come from Ukraine? No one knew that until Ukraine suddenly had to unable to give us the supplies, and we had to buy much more expensive sunflower oil from Western countries instead. So if you look at all of this, there were some short-term weaknesses, but on the whole, the Indian economy only suffered from one thing, which is petrol prices went up higher than we had budgeted. But in every other respect, India has not done that badly, so they can turn around and say to me, why should we not follow our present policy, Tharoor? Because what you're saying hasn't turned out yet. My feeling still is that on this issue, we cannot afford to be on the wrong side of history. History will judge this as an unjustified invasion, and I believe in the long term, the determination of the Western world to ensure that Ukraine does not collapse will help see Ukraine through. And if there's a long drawn-out, protracted war going on between these two countries, Ukraine with Western backing and Russia unfortunately revealing all its own weaknesses and dependent more and more on China for some of the sophisticated electronics and defense equipment it can't get from Western sources anymore. For example, they're no longer able to import semiconductor chips from anywhere but China. One example. Therefore, a Russia dependent on China and the West getting more and more impatient with our lack of firm opposition to Russia's war might not be in the long term in our advantage. So I still say that we should be a little more tough and critical, or alternatively, we should be a very strong force for peace. There I don't completely blame the Indian government, because at the moment what I'm seeing is that neither side seems to be ready for peace. Neither Russia nor Ukraine. But we should be attentive to the slightest possibility of war fatigue in both countries, and we should try and move in very quickly as a peacekeeper. If that happens, then that would justify our having kept our lines of communication open with the Russians, and at the same time not having burned our bridges with Ukraine and the West.
Thank you so much for that comment. I'm sure that 3 minutes of explanation would outperform you reading 10 books on this Russia-Ukraine war. Anyway, I think we have taken a lot of time having this conversation, and we want to turn the mic to our audience, and I think we will just pass the mics around, and whoever has questions can just raise your hand and show the questions. I think, yeah, let's give this lady a chance. Mics, please.
Please tell us who you are, if you're a student, what you're studying, and so on. We'd love to hear from you. Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
25 years of my existence, this is my first time hearing a politician speak, and sir, you definitely set the bar so high. I am so definitely blessed to be able to be here on this show, and thank you so much, Sir Lunglen, for making this show free.
Thank you. Politician shows always free, don't worry. Until you vote them to power, and then they'll do what they want to the people. No, I'm joking.
Okay, sir, it's not actually a question, it's part of a concern actually.
Yeah.
And I would like to throw my concern on racism, which was not covered in this interview, which rules during pandemic. That is, we the Northeastern, we definitely do not look like the mainlanders. We have different features, and because of that, during the Corona, we could see that our people were facing lots of racism, and till today we do face that. And I would like to know your opinion. Why is that so? Is it because of the ignorance of the mainlanders, or is it because the education system in India does not cover a single topic of cultural diversity here in the Northeast? In the year 2021, we the students of Nagaland University, Lumami, we did a Twitter storm where we hashtag NCERT to include the syllabus that covers the Northeast, but unfortunately, I don't think there has been any steps taken.
I tweeted in support of that.
Thank you so much, sir. So my question is, what are your opinions on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I've actually mentioned this and spoken about it, and I've written it in 2 or 3 articles which you can find, that I'm not trying to understand the bad behavior, but there is no doubt that what our northeastern citizens experience, particularly in Delhi and other urban environments in India, was very similar to what happened in a number of countries around the world. I'm not excusing it. It was wrong and unjustified, but we've had examples at that very time, in the same time that Nagas and other Northeasterners were going through such experiences, of Chinese Australians being shouted at in supermarkets in Australia because China was blamed for starting the pandemic. In fact, a lot of this happened in the first couple of months, so first few months of 2020, because it was seen as a pandemic that originated in China because of the Chinese habits in this so-called wet market of eating pangolins and so on. So there was a sense that it's all the Chinese people's fault, and anyone who looked remotely Chinese suddenly got blamed by everyone. It happened in Australia, happened in America, happened in sadly in India, and you're not Chinese to begin with, so you're quite right. It shows the lack of education, that so many people in India don't have a sense of appreciation of what it's all about. I remember making a similar comment earlier than the pandemic when the movie Mary Kom came out, and instead of a Northeastern actress, we had Priyanka Chopra playing that part. And there's something sad about pandering to the ignorance of people, in this case of the mainland Hindi cinema watching audience, when we could actually gain so much more by exposing Indians to the reality of our lives here. If we make a movie about a Northeastern person, we should have a Northeastern actress who looks like that, and show them that these are also Indians, and they're not only Indian, they brought glory to India with their exploits. And I hope that the next time we have a sports star from your part of the world, it will be played by somebody who actually looks like that kind of person. That's the first and most important observation. The second thing is, why did all this happen in those periods? I think it's a reflection of the fact that somehow when there is crisis, people have this terribly negative instinct of sort of circling the wagons around themselves. There is this tendency, we saw xenophobia coming up, for example, right across the Western world. And it wasn't just against people who look different. I've pointed out to European audiences that Europe, with all its talk of Europe being one and all these countries dissolving their borders, what happened when the first cases of COVID happened in Italy? The neighboring European countries shut their borders with Italy. They wouldn't even send medicines to Italy. They wouldn't let their people go, and they wouldn't let people come back. Now that kind of thing is absurd, but there is this panic reaction. The panic reaction that somehow we have to protect ourselves. And who do we protect ourselves from? From those who are not us. And you define the not us in the most narrow way possible. It's a terrible thing, but it shows the great need for education, for people's awareness. I personally would wish not only that NCERT would adopt your idea of a syllabus that teaches about the Northeast, which I did tweet in support of, and I think I'm glad you reminded me, because the time has come that I should try and ask a question in Parliament about this, either written or oral, but I think it's worth doing. I hope my colleague here has taken note of what I'm saying publicly. No, he's disappeared from the audience. We'll do it. We'll put it there. But the other thing I want to say is that not only should we have, Alan, we should be raising a question in Parliament about this idea of having the NCERT syllabus include courses on the Northeast and revealing the realities of the Northeast to the mainland mainstream Indians. And and then as far as the other thing is concerned, I think we should also absolutely encourage the film industry to do their part in enhancing our national integration. If Congress were in power, I would certainly say that we should offer inducements and benefits, tax incentives, for example, waiver of entertainment tax and so on, for films that encourage this sense of nationhood, of common nationality across the country. I would love to see, there was a movie made in the 60s by the famous Khwaja Ahmed Abbas called South Hindustani, where he had 7 different Indians, 7 corners coming together in some enterprise. I was too young to see it at that time. But my message has always been that we should use all the resources at the government's disposal to encourage positive values, rather than, as unfortunately seems to be happening these days, divisive values favoring one community and making others feel small. That is a terrible, terrible kind of political approach. We need to encourage much more this kind of system where we will show more of these things and we will teach more of these realities. Are you a student yourself, or what are you doing? Yeah? Okay. Good. We'll keep it up and do more Twitter hashtags on this. We'll pick it up again when I ask the question.
I think we'll go to the next question, but as a request to Dr. Tharoor also, to keep your response as fast and brief as possible, so that others get a chance to ask other questions as well. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Shashi.
Good evening. Hi.
Thank you so much for your willingness and humility to apologize to the people of Nagaland. If the statistics shown by our show host is correct, but I assure you 100% that advocacy has been committed to the people of Nagaland, especially to the women that's been raped. So many villages has been burned down, and you can see the cascading effects of what has been done for so many years now at the present Nagaland. It's not something that's been BJP has been built up. It's the years that has been built up and it's coming out today. I think the generation now, what we want is a past that needs healing, and a present where we are fearless to dream about a future where we can live. But we cannot do that as long as the Armed Forces Special Act, which was imposed, if my memory is correct, in 1958, and whether the Delhi has the power of Congress or BJP comes, it's still the same. You treat the same attitude with the Northeast states. So the Armed Forces Special Act, which keeps on extending years and years, which was imposed in 1958, how can we have the assurance if Congress comes to power and the next session that this Armed Forces Special power will be removed from?
Don't forget,
you are saying that if the statistic is correct, but whatever the host has said, then you will say sorry to the people of Nagaland for the atrocities that have been committed. But I assure you, sir, if the statistic is wrong, but the atrocities is committed, I think that Delhi owes an apology to the people of Nagaland.
I agree. But don't forget, I'm in opposition. And there's a limit to how much I can deliver from this government. But I will tell you one thing, the assurance you seek, you already have. Look up the Congress's manifesto for 2019. We have actually said we want to see the Armed Forces Special Act withdrawn, and we have said that at the most, if it can't be done in one blanket sweep, it should be withdrawn district by district. And we meant that universally, not just Nagaland, but also Kashmir and elsewhere. It is only supposed to have been applied to disturbed areas where there is actual threat of violence to the armed forces. And where there is violence, the armed forces have successfully pleaded with successive Indian governments that they should not be forced to fight with their hands tied behind their back. They should have the right to take proactive action. But that does not include impunity for rape, unjustified violence against civilians. Absolutely not. There have been a few court-martials. I don't know if there have been any in Nagaland. There have been in Kashmir. It's extremely important that the army also upholds certain values. And our Human Rights Commission gives training in human rights practices to the army as well, going back to the Congress era when I was aware of these things happening. Let me say that if we can ensure that these things are withdrawn, much of Nagaland is calm, talks are going on, we can certainly remove the act. Only in places where there is active, ongoing insurgency, violence, militancy is it justified, and where the army has been called in. Only in those circumstances is it justified. Otherwise, the Congress party sticks strongly by the view that it can be progressively withdrawn. That's your assurance? You got it.
I have to see it happen, not on words but in action.
No, as I say, the moment we come to power, we have to stand by our manifesto, and it's in our manifesto of 2019. Google it, you'll see it. Okay? Yeah. There's a lady standing up.
Kindly forgive one of your biggest fans
Thank
if
you.
she's being over the top or if she mispronounces some words. But I'm so starstruck right now, and I might never get this opportunity again. So, sir, please explain yourself. How can someone be so astonishingly good-looking and charismatic, and even more implausibly brilliant and intelligent at the same time? Sir, please spill some secrets.
You are very sweet and very kind and generous, but all I can say is there are things you can't help, and there are things that you can train yourself to do. So the way you look and all of that, honestly, all I can say is choose your parents wisely. It's all in the genes.
Thank you, sir.
It's all in the genes. But everything else, you should work at it. I mean, I must say that you know, reading, as I explained earlier, became a habit in childhood. I've kept it up, and therefore I've read a lot, so I think I know a lot because I've retained a lot of what I've read. I am proud to say that that it wasn't always easy speaking fluently before a bunch of strangers, but speaking before an audience. But once you've done it often enough, you develop the confidence, and particularly when you know that your ideas are clear and it's a question of expressing them before people, then that's something you get to do, but you have to practice it by doing it. There's no foolproof thing, and you can't sit at home and practice in front of a mirror. You have to go out in front of a real audience and talk to real people and see how they react, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and then you have to go ahead and come back with you know, an occasional blush on your face because you didn't do so well, but then at the end of it you will come back and get better at it. So some things you have to keep working at. Some things, as I say, you know, thank the Maker, thank the Lord, that that's what you are. Thanks very much.
I think, let me interrupt here. I want to ask, how many more questions do you think you can take?
I don't know, because my colleagues who are organizing the trip are a little alarmed about how long it's been going on already.
Okay.
So what, one or two more questions, or that's it? Two more? That's it. Okay.
So, yeah, two more questions. I think let's give boys some men some chance.
Hello? 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 Sir?
Oh, where are you?
Up there, on the balcony,
Hello.
sir. On the balcony.
On the balcony. Hi. How are you?
Okay. In your opening speech, you said in the last 5 years, Nagaland, very sadly, affect of course, Nagaland is the only state that is an opposition-led government. Indeed, that is a fact. Now, what do you are a very influential person, sir, so what do you say about this to our young people?
I think, to be honest, that every democracy needs an opposition. I think even Mr. Modi has said that he wants to see a strong opposition. I don't know if he means it, but he said it. And the truth is that it becomes necessary for two very important reasons. First, especially in our parliamentary system where you can form the government with 37% of the vote, no government truly represents all the points of view in the country or in the state. And therefore you need an opposition to express those points of view and those interests that the government does not embody. And the second reason is somebody has to hold the government accountable. Somebody has to speak truth to power in the halls of power. somebody has to challenge, record their opposition. Even if you are only one or two people, you have to at least vote against an unjust or tyrannical decision or law. You should use the mechanisms available to you by questioning the government and so on. Imagine we have legislative committees, parliamentary committees in Parliament, assembly committees in the Assembly. But a committee is supposed to go in detail into a proposed law or a proposed policy, question the officials. But if there's nobody from the opposition, the government gets a free pass, they do what they like. In effect, if you don't have an opposition, you're converting your democracy into a dictatorship for the duration of that period. That's terrible. And therefore, it's extremely important for the people of Nagaland. Even if you want to see a majority government of somebody you like, at least let there be people representing the voices that disagree with you. Because after all, you could be wrong, and they could be wrong. And you need someone to hold their feet to the fire when that happens. Okay?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I have a slight cold and cough. My apologies.
Yeah. It is a joy to see you here. You pride enough.
I think we'll allow one token question from a man also after this. Otherwise, the gender dominance has been complete.
All right, well, please this question.
Yeah, sure.
So, personally, I feel that the Congress, they should be given one opportunity to come back, not just in Nagaland, but in the country, to right all the wrongs that have been done in the past. But, however, as a concerned millennial, I'm not a student, okay? I'm stuck between the boomers and the Gen X and the Gen Z. But as a very concerned millennial, I see that the Congress Party have not been putting that much effort that should have been good. Because it's just not the Nagaland election, like in the past also the state elections are there, and then the nationals are just a year away. So I think like everybody should come out of the bed and should work more harder, should put in more effort if they want to come, because like not just me, but a lot of us resonates with your ideologies, with the ideologies of the Congress government, and we really want to step both of our foot in the party, but then one of our foot is out because we cannot see that strong conviction and like a very strong effort being put in. So what would you say to that?
I agree with you. I think that people should get out of bed and work very hard. I do it all the time, and I hope my colleagues will do the same. But I'd also encourage some of you who are obviously concerned citizens, thoughtful citizens, interested in these issues, to get up and get involved yourself. I mean, I mentioned the All India Professionals Congress, for example. Anyone who wants to join AIPC or simply find out more about it can talk to absolutely to Presto, to Lovita, to Alim Javeri, the young guy in a black shirt standing there. Stand up, Alim. So he's also there. He's come with me from Delhi. Talk to any of them you can find, and for God's sake, get involved yourself, let your ideas be heard, and you can help ginger up the others to do more. I think it's extremely important that we keep the conversation going, and it's not always possible for me to come physically, but you can see what I'm writing on my website, shashitharoor.in. You can see, listen to my speeches on YouTube, www.youtube.com/Shashi Tharoor. You can see my speeches from all over the country. There are many ways you can hear what my ideas are, even if I'm not physically in Nagaland at that time. And I would urge all of you personally to engage, because a democracy is only as good as the citizens in it. And the democracy will be strengthened if the citizens demand their rights, get involved, try and hold those in power accountable. The election is over on 27th. But you have to live with the results for the next 5 years. And during that period, you're not going to sit back and say, well, they won the election, nothing I can do. You've got to be, the real strength of a democracy is what happens between elections. How you can hold people accountable. Keep public engagement going. And that's where people like you, when you ask that question, the answer lies in yourselves as well. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Okay. One of the men, he got the mic, sorry. Yeah.
My name is Benito.
Well, the first one was given his name. None of these ladies were willing to give their names.
Dr. Shashi Tharoor, many nowadays can make the mistake of thinking that I am related with the Italian dictator. Well, I am 100% a Seminaga with a Seminaga name, I had no relationship with the dictator.
Suminaga.
Far from it. I am a vocal critic of everything and anything that is dictatorial. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to sound politically correct, but I can reiterate that almost the vast majority of the people in Nagaland rooted for Shashi Tharoor to become the president of the INC.
Thank you.
Well, that did not happen.
It didn't happen.
I definitely believe, and I want to believe that it is for the greater good. Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for standing tall against all odds
Thank you.
and making the free-thinking people of Nagaland the reason to believe in hope. Now, I have a very simple question for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. But as a backdrop, I have to say that in Nagaland, just as it is in Delhi, we do have a lot of problems. And people actually desperately are grasping, are searching for a reason to believe. Now, the reason of all the many problems in Nagaland ultimately boils down to one factor, and the factor is unity. There is a call for unity everywhere. Unity. And what do we have here now? Unity has been so overused. It has been so overused that ultimately it has resulted in the creating of a certain environment, a fertile ground for only a particular idea to take root and grow.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you can just directly ask the question, it seems he has to rush out.
No, actually, I have to give this backdrop because unless I give this backdrop, he won't be able to answer the question. And therefore, unity in Nagaland, you see, the definition of unity in the dictionary has been completely altered in the context of Nagaland. And as I have said, unity has succeeded only in resulting in creating an environment where only a particular agenda grows. In such an environment, how do free-thinking people of Nagaland survive? The space is shrinking.
I agree.
And therefore, going forward, I want to ask from Dr. Shashi Tharoor, what has the Congress in mind about this?
I don't think there is.
About this abnormal situation in Nagaland, where free-thinking people are neither here nor there, between the devil and the deep sea, like a drowning man watching a thrust.
Thank you very much, Benito. I must say, you've lived up to your namesake, Benito Mussolini, who gave very long speeches. But it was also very compelling to listen to. Listen, this is a problem we have not only in Nagaland, but across India, because we have a government that confuses unity with uniformity. I don't believe that uniformity is required for unity. I think what you have with unity is where people are united around a common endeavor or a common goal, but they pursue it in their own way, respecting their own qualities and their own diversity. And so this whole notion of unity in diversity is something we hold very, very precious in the Congress Party and across India, and that's what we would like to see happening in our country and in Nagaland as well. What happened? We're supposed to wrap up now.
I think.
One question, Dr. Tharoor.
Guys, we'll never finish.
One question, Dr. Tharoor. One question.
I'm very sorry because he has to go. And just before he leaves, let's conclude with a selfie with Dr. Tharoor. So whoever wants to be part of the selfie, please be seated wherever you are.
Uh-oh. I'm delighted there's so much interest, but we really are way beyond the agreed time.